Hi folks, John Dunn here, RPG freelancer, publisher behind Meliorvia, and I am up here tonight with Mikey at Immortals Inc.
What is up, John? How is life?
Things are going pretty good, and you?
Yeah, it's pretty good myself. I figured that we had something exciting to talk about today.
Well, since things are going pretty good, that is the time to dive into the dark dystopian worlds, right?
Not to mention, it might be licensed.
It is licensed. Specifically, tonight I thought we would talk about the Blade Runner RPG core rulebook from Free League. And yeah, this is licensed based on the movie with Harrison Ford.
Which I've seen.
Excellent. Glad to hear it.
Rare occasion.
So the lead on this is Thomas Harenstam, and my apologies if I mangled that. He's one of the founders of Free League, and he also worked on the Alien RPG that we talked about, the starter set, and the Twilight 2000 starter set that we talked about. So we are kind of familiar with his stuff based on that.
Yeah.
And he actually had he has a neat intro in this book where he talked about his experience with Blade Runner as a kid growing up and how many times he had watched the VHS of it, which I enjoyed reading because I have similar interactions with having watched the VHS.
How many times have you watched Blade Runner?
I have no idea. I mean, it had Harrison Ford. I'm a Star Wars guy. I had to watch it. So this was initially funded off a Kickstarter in May of 22. They raised about 160,000 US dollars, but it was in Swedish krona. And they had about 15,000 backers. So the old crowd was real interested in this. And it is, like I said, based on the film as well as Philip K. Dick's short novel. Have you read that?
No.
Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? That's the original.
Okay. I would assume they do.
Name. I mean, that's the question. Yeah. And it does use the Year Zero engine, which is, it's a little variant of it, but it's essentially that same game system as in the other games that we talked about previously. It's about 230 pages, not the thickest core book we've ever dealt with, but there's still a whole lot of content in here, as well as, just some gorgeous artwork. Not really a whole lot of stuff that's actually from the films, but a lot of original artwork that's in there, and it pops.
I'm sure it helps you to understand the film a little better because it's very ahead of its time.
So the book dives into the world of the film, and it actually gives you a lot of depth that you don't easily draw out of it, right? So the first whole chapter of this does talk about that world setting, and this is set a little ways after the first film. It's set in the year 2037, so before the sequel that came out a year or two ago. And it's set in LA, and it has a neat timeline that goes back to the 80s, which is very different from our own timeline. And it does assume that the player characters are going to be police officers who are part of the replicant detection unit. So it is their job to find replicants who are breaking the law, much like our hero in the original film. The tech has changed a bit. There's actually new generations of replicants, and they're harder to identify. You can't go through that same scanning the retina and asking questions process that you could in the original film.
Could never always be that easy, No,
it can't be that easy. So they had to complicate matters a little bit. Chapter 2 dives right into character creation. You get to pick whether your PC is a human or a replicant, and there is the option that maybe your PC is a replicant who doesn't know they're a replicant, and that can come into play later on. Once you've picked whether you're either of those options, then you get to pick an archetype, and that's basically focuses on the type of work that your character does within the LAPD. There's 7 different options presented, and it does note that these archetypes aren't really, job listings. They're just kind of where your character's primary focus is in the work that they do and maybe what they have the most success with. Once you've picked out your archetype, then it dives into experience and attributes and skills. So basically just, kind of fleshing out your character's game mechanics, much like every other Year Zero system game. And then you really identify your character by picking a key memory, kind of that thing that defines them, much like the flashbacks that were such a big part of the film. And then a relationship that's critical to them and a signature item. Basically, the item that they reach for that makes them who they are. They're the thing that the camera will focus in on. And that's pretty much your whole character right there. So after that, we get into game mechanics. Chapter 3 is your skills and specialties. Chapter 4 is combats and chases. Again, very similar to what we've seen other places with the Year Zero engine, so I'm not going to dive into that too much. Chapter 5 is A Tale of Two Cities, and I thought this was a very aptly named title. You get the reference there, right?
Yeah.
To the Charles Dickens novel. And they do talk about in this section how LA is a very different place if you're, one of the replicants or one of the working poor than it is if you're one of the affluent. That there's a sharp and stark contrast between those two worlds. And as a police officer, you kind of have to navigate between them because you do have authority in both of those worlds, though maybe not as much authority in the world of the ultra rich.
Yeah, you always see that divide too when you watch the movies. I mean, you see that straight divide. There's like no separate, group. If
Absolutely, yeah. And so that's kind of what defines LA in this setting. And, it really does call out to Dickens and Austen, those kinds of worlds that were defined back in that classic literature. So it's a neat parallel, and it's really kind of well described here. And it's a theme that can reflect really well throughout the adventure as your characters move between different places and experience those different environments and have the different interactions. This chapter also gives you a great info dump about the different neighborhoods of LA, and it breaks them down and goes through each of these different neighborhoods and talks about what kinds of things your characters are going to encounter there and, who they can go to. It really does bring it to life, and there's some great artwork in there that really evokes it as well. After that, we get into the powers that be. That's chapter 6, and this talks about the organizations that are prevalent in the world of 2037. Just different factions that are in power, particularly corporations, but also some non-governmental organizations as well. And then after that, it gets into the types of replicants, Nexus 6, Nexus 8, and Nexus 9. I believe Nexus 6 were the same version that we saw in the movie. The 8s and the 9s are newer iterations of them, and they are more human-like.
They just have the slang. Yeah.
Yeah, they got a few different things going for them, honestly. Chapter 7 kind of drives home the fact that this is a police game. So adventures are presented as cases. And this gets into how you're going to conduct an investigation, what kinds of different things you as a player running a police officer character can do to move that investigation forward, the types of networking you have, the types of assets that you have at hand, the different organizations that you might want to be getting into contact with, and how you're going to leverage those connections in order to advance your investigation. It does not go into the equipment that you're going to be using because that's chapter 8, the tools of the trade. So you've got your high-tech gear, you've got your guns, you've got your vehicles, which are spinners, so the kind of hover cars.
I like them.
Yeah, and so you do have cars as well as, spinner motorcycles, essentially.
Not safe.
Well, no, inherently not safe. But
no way.
Looks like a whole lot of fun.
I mean, yeah.
And then it also gets into where to shop. So if you want a piece of equipment that might not be normally issued, where you would go to acquire that, particularly if it's something that's maybe not especially legal as a police officer, maybe there might be some quandaries there. Chapter 9 is the GM advice chapter. This is called Running the Blade Runner, and it gives you a lot about setting tone and then a whole bunch of random tables that you could use to drive an adventure. One thing that is not present here is a sample adventure. So if it's critical to you that you have an XYZ sample adventure, you might want to look at the starter set, which I'm going to assume is an awful lot like the Aliens one, where you maybe don't have all the character creation material, but you do have some pre-generated characters and an adventure that's ready to run, along with all the dice that you need. Again, this is from Free League Publishing. Full color, hardcover, around 230 pages, $60. And like I said, we've got this on the shelf, and we also have the starter set available on the shelf if you want to take a look at both of them. Stop in or, hit up the website at immortalsinc.com.
Links all below. Well said, my friend. Check it out.
Till next time, good gaming.